Everyone thought Caitlin Clark was about to lose control of her own team. But what actually happened inside that training camp told a completely different story. For the past week, the internet was flooded with theories. Fans were convinced something was off. Some believed the Indiana Fever were quietly shifting away from Clark. Others claimed a new system was being built that would limit her role completely. But when day one finally arrived, none of those expectations held up. Because instead of stepping into uncertainty, Caitlin Clark walked in and immediately took over. And what happened next didn't just silence the noise, it completely flipped the narrative around her and this team. If you want real breakdowns without the noise, make sure you subscribe to Simply Explained, where we focus on what actually matters, not just what trends. Now let's get into what really happened, because this changes everything. Before training camp even began, the conversation around Caitlin Clark had already spiraled out of control. Across social media, there was a growing belief that something behind the scenes wasn't right. Rumors suggested the Fever front office was making decisions that could reduce Clark's influence. The draft pick of Raven Johnson became a major talking point, with fans speculating that the team was preparing for a shift away from Clark as the primary playmaker. At the same time, questions around head coach Stephanie White added fuel to the fire. Some reports claimed that a more structured system could push Clark into an off-ball role, something that would fundamentally change how she plays the game. None of this was confirmed, but the noise kept growing. The idea that one of the most impactful players in the league might be restricted created a wave of concern. Fans weren't just watching anymore, they were waiting for something to go wrong. And that tension made day one of training camp feel bigger than usual. Because this wasn't just about practice, it was about proving whether any of those concerns had real weight, or if they were just speculation that got out of control. And within minutes, the answer became clear. As soon as practice started, the entire narrative shifted. Caitlin Clark wasn't playing off to the side. She wasn't being limited. She was doing the exact opposite. She had full control of the offense. The ball stayed in her hands, and everything flowed through her decisions. She pushed the pace, created spacing, and dictated how possessions developed. Every movement on the floor seemed connected to her vision of the game. What stood out wasn't just the skill, it was the authority. There was no hesitation in her play, no signs of adjustment. She looked completely comfortable running the team as the primary engine, making reads quickly and executing at a high level. Observers noted how naturally the system adapted around her, not the other way around. And that alone told a bigger story. Because if the plan had been to reduce her role, it would have shown immediately. Instead, what we saw was a system built to maximize her strengths. And just like that, most of the speculation from the previous week started to lose credibility. But there was still one question left. How could she return at this level after so much time away? Caitlin Clark hadn't played competitive WNBA basketball for months. During that time, she dealt with multiple physical setbacks, the kind that usually slow players down, especially early in their return. Expectations were simple. Take it slow, ease back in, and rebuild rhythm over time. That's not what happened. From the moment she stepped on the court, she looked sharp. Not just physically, but mentally locked in. Her movements were decisive. Her timing was intact, and more importantly, her confidence never seemed to drop. There was no sign of hesitation in her game. She attacked situations the same way she always has, quickly and aggressively. This wasn't the version of a player working their way back. It looked like someone who had already reset and was ready to compete immediately. And that changes how opponents prepare. Because when a player returns stronger than expected, it removes any window of adjustment that teams usually rely on. But this level of performance didn't just appear overnight. There was already a preview of it before training camp even began. Before stepping into training camp, Caitlin Clark had already tested herself against international competition. During the FIBA qualifiers, she delivered one of the most efficient performances of the tournament. In limited minutes, she controlled the pace, created opportunities, and produced results without forcing the game. It wasn't just about scoring, it was about decision-making. She showed the ability to read defenses quickly and respond with precision, something that becomes even more valuable at higher levels of competition. That performance wasn't heavily discussed at the time, but it mattered because it showed she was already in rhythm before returning to the WNBA environment. And when you combine that with what we saw on day one of camp, it creates a clear pattern. She wasn't coming back to find her form. She had already found it. But there was still another storyline people were watching closely, and it had nothing to do with her performance. One of the biggest talking points leading into camp was the dynamic between Caitlin Clark and Raven Johnson. Online discussions framed it as a potential conflict. Some fans believed there would be tension over roles, especially with both players capable of handling the ball. But what actually happened looked very different. There was no visible friction. Both players operated within their roles and focused on execution. Johnson brought defensive intensity and energy, while Clark remained the primary offensive initiator. Instead of overlap, there was balance. And that's important, because strong teams don't rely on identical skill sets, they rely on complementary ones. From early observations, that's exactly what this pairing offers. Even comments from teammates suggested that the perceived drama existed more outside the team than inside it, which isn't uncommon. But it does highlight something important. Not every narrative built online reflects reality. And once that storyline faded, attention shifted to something more subtle but more impactful. Before the season even began, Caitlin Clark made a public statement supporting head coach Stephanie White. On the surface, it sounded like a standard comment, but in context, it carried more weight. She emphasized trust in the system and confidence in being placed in positions to succeed. That kind of statement sets expectations, because once it's said publicly, it creates a standard that's difficult to move away from. And based on what we saw in training camp, that standard is being followed. Clark remains in a role where she controls tempo, initiates offense, and maximizes her strengths. That alignment between player and system is critical. When it works, it simplifies decision-making across the team, and when it doesn't, it creates friction. So far, there's no sign of that friction. Instead, there's structure and clarity, which brings us to the bigger picture. One of the biggest differences this season is the roster itself. Compared to last year, the team looks more balanced and more capable of supporting a high-level offensive system. There's interior presence, perimeter scoring, and defensive stability, all of which reduce the pressure on a single player to carry every possession. That matters, because when a player like Caitlin Clark has reliable options around her, it opens up more efficient decision-making. Defenses can't focus on just one threat anymore, and that changes how games are played. Spacing improves, passing lanes open, shot selection becomes cleaner. From early observations, this team isn't just more talented, it's more functional. And that combination creates potential. But potential alone doesn't guarantee results, end quote. Which is why the next phase matters more than anything we've seen so far. One practice doesn't define a season. There's still a long way to go, and real competition will reveal more about how this team performs under pressure. But early signs matter. And right now, those signs are clear. The biggest question heading into camp was whether Caitlin Clark would still be the central piece of this team. That question has already been answered. She is. Everything we've seen points toward a system built around her strengths, not away from them. And if that continues, it creates a strong foundation for consistency. Because when roles are defined early, execution becomes easier over time. Now the focus shifts to actual games, because that's where expectations are tested and where narratives are either confirmed or completely rewritten. So, after all the speculation, all the online debates, and all the uncertainty, the reality turned out to be much simpler. Caitlin Clark is still the center of this team. The system supports her, the roster complements her, and her performance shows she's already operating at a high level. Nothing we saw suggests a reduced role. If anything, it points in the opposite direction. But the real test is still ahead, because practice sets the tone. Games define the outcome. If you want clear, no-noise breakdowns as the season unfolds, subscribe to Simply Explained, because we don't follow hype, we follow what actually happens. And based on what we've seen so far, this season might be very different from what people expected. Stay locked with my channel, Simply Explained, for further WNBA updates.